Good afternoon and welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange, Leadership Tools and Strategies. So thrilled to have you in April 28th, 2015. I am, as always, your host, Todd Greer, Executive Director of the Center Vision Leadership Foundation. And we are so thrilled to have today as our guest, Dr. Gretchen Spreitzer. She is the Keith E. and Valerie J. Alessi Professor of Business Administration in the Stephen M. Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. She's also one of the co-directors of the Center for Positive Organizations. And as you will see, if you look at her bio, her CV, she certainly is one of the foremost researchers on positive organizational scholarship in the world. So thrilled to have you in, Gretchen. Fantastic work here. We're talking a little bit today about how to be a positive leader in your work on that. For folks at home, I briefly gave a little bit of an introduction to who you are. Tell them a little bit more, if you would, about who you are and what you do there in the Center for Positive Organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a faculty here in the Management and Organizations group, and I teach classes here on positive leadership and on organizational change from a positive perspective. I'm also the incoming faculty director for our Center for Positive Organizations. We've been a center since 2002, and our focus is really similar. I think we think of ourselves as like cousins to the positive psychology movement, but really focusing on organizations and work and how we can help organizations become more positive places, how we can develop leaders who create more positive organizations, and better understanding the research behind how to enable that to happen. So the research piece is really crucial to who we are. We've got 7 high value added faculty who are part of our center, who are all working in different dimensions of positive organizations and positive leaders. And then we have a staff who helps us with the kind of outreach to companies and outreach to different student groups. Because we're in a business school, we are also focused on developing young leaders. And our staff also helps us with the cases and the tools and the different kind of mechanisms that we use to teach and help people learn positive leadership and positive organizations.
And that's such an important framework that you guys are presenting. And I think as Dr. Spreitzer and I were talking off air, I was very intrigued by the Center for Positive Organizations. One, I'm a Southeast Michigan boy, born and raised, so go blue. I've always been waiting to say that on the show. But my own research has aligned with some of the interesting work that's been done there. And one of the fellows previously at the Center for Positive Organizations was an inspiration in some of my work. So I'm thrilled to have you guys on. We worked with Dr. Lynn Wooten in our December issue of Nonprofit Performance Magazine. She gave an introductory work to why positive organizational scholarship and what we need to think about in the nonprofit space. And I really want to hone in a little bit today in your amazing work with how to be a positive leader. You co-authored a chapter within that book with Christine Porath from Georgetown. And in that chapter, you guys focused on this concept of thriving at work. For those that are maybe not as familiar with that concept, Gretchen, would you share with us a little bit, what does it mean to thrive or be thriving at work?
Mm-hmm. So let me even step back for a moment and say a little bit about how we got interested in that topic. So three women senior faculty at Ross were having a conversation one day over lunch, and we were saying, man, we got the best jobs in the world. You know, get to work with students, get to generate new research ideas. We are at a great institution. You mentioned it a second ago, Go Blue, you know, high quality university, and we're part of this wonderful center. But the reality is it's hard to stay on top of your game over the years. It's easy to get burned out. And what can we do? We were interested in this personally. What can we do to really stay energized, to really feel like we're thriving in our jobs in our careers over the life course, and not have this up and down sort of thing, but where we've got this positive trajectory of growing, developing, learning, and staying on the edge of our game. And so because we had that personal interest, we said, let's figure out how to do this. I mean, that's an important part of leadership, right? Is how do you maintain positive energy? How do you keep moving in a forward direction and making good progress and that sort of thing? So we began a research project where we first looked at a lot of different bodies of literature. Some people look at thriving from like a resilience perspective. So that is, when something difficult comes across in your life, maybe it's a diagnosis that you don't want to have. Maybe it's something in a job situation, maybe there's a downsizing or a bankruptcy or something like that. How do you bounce back? How do you get back to where you were before? Or even better, how do you bounce higher? How do you learn from those situations and so forth to, bounce back and bounce better? Well, that's interesting, but I honestly felt in my career so far that I didn't have a lot of those big situations that cause you to reframe or rethink. I said, I've kind of been on a pretty good trajectory, God willing. I haven't had those major things that happen. And it got me thinking more about how do we do this proactively, not just in response to some hiccups in our life or jolts in our life, but how do we proactively create a thriving work environment so that we would be resilient in those situations, but even when they're not there, we're still growing, developing, progressing. Mm-hmm. And so what we, through our research, ended up defining thriving as is growing and developing in a positive direction with forward motion through the joint experience of two things: feeling really energized by your work. We use the word vitality. So feeling a strong sense of vitality that your work gives you life, is life-giving. A lot of times we think about work as being hard. Work is a grind. Work is something we need to recover from on the weekends or vacations or so forth. But when people are thriving, they actually feel like their work is creating energy. It's making them feel more alive. And so that's one component. And then the other component is about learning and growing and getting better. So thriving is that joint experience of learning, growing, and getting better at the same time you feel really alive and vitalized in your work. And those two are both really important because there's lots of times where we can think about, we're growing, we're developing, we're being challenged, we're in new ways, but we feel overloaded or we feel overwhelmed, and that's not thriving. Or there's times we're really jazzed up about something at work, but we're still staying within our comfort zone. We're not challenged, we're not learning, we're not growing in new ways. And so that's not thriving either. It's really that juxtaposition of those two things, vitality and having a learning orientation where you're getting better.
That's such an interesting concept. And I know probably everybody has been bombarded in the last couple of years with the research on disengagement in organizations. And I think that's the really unique piece here is, as you guys were setting this up, particularly in this chapter, you're talking about how do you thrive. You focus first on how do we do some self-leadership. And I think that's one of those things that's really unique. Before we can, Neck and Houghton would say, before we can lead others, we need to be able to lead ourselves. And you focus in on 4 specific strategies here for how we create that ownership in our own life for thriving. And you talk about crafting your work to be more meaningful, looking for opportunities to innovate, investing in relationships that energize, and then taking care of your health through energy management. Would you, if you don't mind, would you step us through a little bit in those 4 areas and talk a little bit about what that might look like?
Yeah. So, Todd, let me also say that I think one feature of this book, How to Be a Positive Leader, is that each chapter is like a different lens for how to go about becoming a positive leader. And it's all research-based. So we're not just, sharing ideas or best practices. These are things that are actually supported by research. And so the things that I'm sharing with you right now are the strategies that we found to give the most leverage to people in terms of actually predicting greater levels of thriving. And the other thing I think that's important is that this set of strategies or lenses are about what people can do themselves, even if they're in an organization that might not be an organization that's really enabling thriving, what's within people's own sphere of control. Now, there's another set of variables we'll talk about in a few minutes that's about if you're a leader and want to create a more thriving organization, what you can do. But these are strategies for people that might not have influence or authority in the system, what they can do to enable more thriving. So the first one that you mentioned is finding more meaning in work. Well, that's a pretty central feature we're finding in our research on positive leadership, is that when people have purpose or connection to their work, that they feel more energized. And when they feel more purpose or meaningfulness in their work, they're more willing to take risks and accept challenges, which allows them to learn and grow in new ways. So meaning's really crucial. And what I would say is meaning's not the same as passion. Sometimes I think passion's wonderful, but I think it can be kind of overwhelming to people to think about, how do I, build passion into my work? It's easier to think about how in my everyday interactions do I have things that are purposeful or meaningful. And it might not be that I'm doing a job that's going to save people's lives. Maybe I'm not a nurse or a doctor or an inventor of medical devices. But how in my everyday work life am I making a difference somehow to the people that I work with? Maybe it's customers. Maybe it's making a customer's day. Or maybe it's colleagues. Maybe it's having this chance to talk with you today rather than just sitting in my office and doing reviews or thinking up new big research ideas. It's those everyday interactions that might create that sense of meaning or purpose in the work. And so I think it's something that doesn't have to be as grandiose as passion, but it's where at the end of the day I say, was it a good day? Did I somehow have an impact in some way? And I think that's really what's essential in creating that sense of meaning. And I think what the good news is that we can all look for those kind of meaningful things in our work lives.
And that's such an important thing, I think, because a lot of times, as you point out, it may not be the place that we ultimately want to be in our work life, or we may not be doing the most glamorous thing. And yet, if we're bringing that sense of impact to others and we're connecting ourselves to it, there is the meaning that's there. I love that concept, because then we're not waiting for some time.
Right. Or, well, until I get that next job. That next job is going to be one I'm going to be able to build my passion in. Or, gosh, when I get to do my entrepreneurial venture, then my work will be meaningful. It's like, how do we create that every day? There was a story that Jim Lohr, the guy who wrote the book, The Power of Full Engagement, he talks about this tennis player who was having difficulty in her game and so forth. And as he was talking with her, he was realizing she didn't have any purpose in her work. And she got to thinking about how she could be purposeful beyond, just the competition of winning games, because at that point she wasn't winning a lot of games. And so she began to rethink her tennis career as bringing sunshine to somebody every day, just that small act of being sunshine to other people. And it helped her rethink the way she lived her life. So whether it was the ball girl that was at the game, whether it was the umpire, whether it was the person cleaning the locker room, whether it was the player, at the end of the game, how she interacted with them. But her goal became to be sunshine to everybody she interacted with. And that transformed. It wasn't just about winning tennis games. It was about something more. All right. So that's meaning and purpose, one lever. Another meaning or another lever is about looking for opportunities to innovate. So I think sometimes in jobs, especially when people feel like they're not in positions of authority or power, they're waiting for somebody else to come and say, here's the next idea, or here's where we're going to go. next. And what we find is that when people can be more proactive in their own jobs for looking at ways to improve, looking for ways to innovate, bring in an idea to their boss, and creating some kind of small win, that's another really potent way to build energy, because you're bringing more of yourself to your work. Now, there's risk involved in that, right? Because you can bring your idea and maybe people won't like your idea. And that's why, you got to bring ideas with a sense of openness and learning. I'm going to bring this idea and I'm going to talk to Todd about it, and we're going to, work through it and see if we can make it better and that sort of thing. So it's not just about, coming and saying, here's my idea, let's implement. It's bringing your ideas for innovation and working with others to figure out ways that we can actually build them into the way work gets done. But the idea is look for those opportunities for innovation, to be proactive and not waiting for somebody else to bring them to you.
That's an interesting one, particularly in light of some of the research that's coming in on millennials. We talk a lot about millennials wanting to bring, you use the term, our whole self. They want to bring their whole self with them to work. And a lot of times they're uncomfortable with what they see as a pace of change. So finding places that we can innovate from within. And I know your colleague there at the Center for Positive Organizations, Chris White, just wrote a book on intrapreneurship. And so that's a piece that I think we're seeing more light of. How do we innovate from within, as opposed to, as you talk about, down the road, I'm going to go create my entrepreneurial venture and then I'll do it.
Yeah. Yep. So the third lever is about investing in relationships that matter to you, that energize you. One of my colleagues, Wayne Baker, does a lot of work on energy networks, and who are the black clouds in any network that, whenever you interact with them, you always leave kind of depleted and defeated. And then there's others, and I'm guessing you're probably one of those kind of people, Todd, is, people go and they interact with you and they say, wow, I can't wait till the next opportunity to go and chat more with Todd. They're the people who lift you up, who elevate you in some way, who create energy. So I just did a little podcast here at the Ross School of Business based on one of my research studies about de-energizers and thriving. And one of the things we talked about is that you can't always avoid those black clouds, those people that are de-energizers. Sometimes they're your boss, sometimes they're a coworker, sometimes they're a really important client or customer. And it's like, we can't just say, hey, I'm not going to interact with you anymore because you're a de-energizer.
Yeah.
But if we know we have to interact with them, we create some boundaries around it. So it may not be all day, every day. We, have set amounts of time, but also that we also create opportunities to fully engage with those people that we do get energy from. So we're kind of balancing things out, or we're having these injections of positive energy alongside the requirements to still work with the people that may be difficult. So it's not one or the other. It's finding ways to integrate both into the work that we do.
That's a fantastic point. And I know in your fourth piece, you really bring out the sense of energy management. And I thought that was an interesting term, and health. And I think those are two really important components here. Take us a little bit deeper into that as well.
Yeah. So this is a big one of mine, because I think it's so much within our own control, this lever or this dimension. And so it's often a useful starting point for people to think around how to improve their energy. So some things are quite simple. There are things like nutrition. How well am I eating? And if I'm eating a lot of sweets and carbohydrates, those are likely to give me a lot of energy for the short term, but then fall off. So how do we eat a more balanced diet so that we've got enough fat and protein in our diet so that our energy is not like this, but more like this? Another one is about sleep. Sleep is so crucial. I mean, I drive my kids crazy talking about this, but you got to test the next day. You're, or a big deliverable the next day. Often our predilection is to stay up late and get it, work it, improve it, fine tune it, and that sort of thing. And then we have no energy the next day to actually deliver it or take the test or whatever it is. But sleep is so potent. It has huge health implications. There's lots of links now to obesity, but it also has huge implications in terms of our productivity and recent research has shown that we're also less ethical when we're sleep deprived. So a whole bunch of things. And if we can find ways to bring just a little bit more sleep into our everyday lives, we'll also feel a lot better and feel a lot happier. So sleep and nutrition are two. A third one is about exercise. So, that's hard in a place. You grew up in Michigan, a good part of the winter, it's really hard to get outside. But, still getting out, taking a walk, using the stairs at work rather than the elevator, just something to get your body moving is another really powerful way for energy management. And it seems a little counterintuitive when you're tired to exercise, but that actual movement actually helps us feel more energized rather than de-energized.
That's such an important lens, I think, here that we oftentimes miss. We get bogged down in whether we call it the stress of work or just, we've got our blinders on and we're focused and we forget about taking care of ourselves. So I think that's an important piece of that self-leadership framework.
Yeah.
You also present in that framework of how do we allow others to thrive in their environments, there in our work situation, and you focus on 4 things, and I want to touch on these briefly and allow you to play with them a little bit more. You talk about the importance of sharing information, giving people discretion to make decisions to reduce or minimize incivility in your office or work setting, and then the importance of offering performance feedback. Would you, if you don't mind, just lead us through what that would look like?
Yep. So again, these are supported by empirical research as being really important for people to feel or experience a sense of thriving. Sharing information is about being transparent. And so it sends a message of trust when you're transparent with people. And so, I say err on the side of providing more information than less information, even if you say, well, maybe it's not that crucial for somebody to know what our budget is for next year. Well, if they know the budget, then they're going to be more likely to make good decisions about allocating resources. So my sense, the research shows that being more transparent is going to be better for building trust and in turn increasing thriving. The second one about empowerment or giving people discretion or a voice in how they do their work. My earlier body of research right after graduate school is about empowerment and self-empowerment and helping people to genuinely feel empowered. This is really crucial for people to feel like they're truly part of the organization, that they're valued, their ideas are important. Earlier we talked about being proactive and looking for opportunities for innovation. Well, this is the leadership side of that, is to give people the space and the encouragement to actually have a say and bring their ideas to the workplace.
That's such a tough one. And I just earlier this week, I was working on setting up an engagement, and I was working with somebody in an organization, and it was a situation, my boss is out of country. I really can't make that decision. And it was one of those moments where I was thinking about your work, and I'm thinking here, this person felt so hamstrung. I mean, they felt that they had to answer to the organization and their supervisor, but at the same time, they felt like they were incapable of helping me at the time. And I think that's one of those tough pieces here that we deal with. How do we empower others for this? Yeah.
Yep. Well, yeah, you can leave people feeling very helpless. And, when we feel helpless, we feel really de-energized and impedes thriving. So as leaders, we have to think about looking for ways to develop the next generation of leaders by giving them more control or more autonomy about how they do their work. It could also play out in giving people more flexibility about where they work or when they work too, more flexibility in their schedules. I'm also doing a lot of research right now on co-working spaces, which are workspaces that are in a variety of different communities, but largely metropolitan areas, where people can go and work alongside other people who may be doing very different kinds of work, but they're engaging work communities, but giving people flexibility about where and how they work too.
Would love to see the follow-up from that, by the way.
Yep. Some of it will be coming out soon in Sloan Management Review, so we'll pass it along to you. Todd, the other two are about minimizing incivility. So my co-author on this chapter, Chris Poratz, she's like the world-renowned expert on incivility in the workplace. And so you could see how this is kind of the opposite of the lever about finding opportunities to interact with people who energize you. As a leader, we really need to create kind of norms and expectations about how people operate in the workspace, where they're not going to be allowed to be prima donnas or those black clouds that, deplete everybody else in the workplace. So as leaders, we can set expectations at the very minimum to say, you have to treat people with respect. You have to listen to people. And, you can't be rude and act in ways that really bring other people down. Mm. And then the last piece is about offering performance feedback. This one came about a little bit later than the other three, but it became really important as leaders, for leaders to let people know how they're doing. And whether it's positive feedback or negative feedback, people really need to know that, to feel like they're making good progress. Mm-hmm. And if they don't get feedback, they don't know if they're on the right trajectory. Of course, if you give negative feedback, it has to be done in a way that's respectful, in a way that helps people grow and hear the feedback, not just be defensive. But then we also have to look for lots of opportunities for positive feedback and let people know when they're doing things right. We sometimes call those positive jolts, but not just saying, hey, Todd, good job, well done, and you pat somebody on the back. Instead, you say, wow, Todd, the way you asked those questions, you really got to the heart of the matter. You really helped that interviewee really come out of their shell. You did a great job. So you're talking about feedback that's behavioral, feedback that gives real world examples and shows how that made a difference to me. To the feedback giver. How did you make a difference to me by what you did?
Was there any time value set into that? Because I know one of the things that we tend to struggle with is we think about that annual performance.
Right. Yeah, this is much more around the everyday kind of interactions and the feedback that's more in the moment or after a project or after an event or something like that, where it's not waiting until the performance review, where everything's all hyped up and formal. It's what's happening on an everyday basis, and what kind of feedback are you giving, and are you giving it in such a way that people can hear it and grow from it?
Fantastic. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, I want to let you know, if you're watching, you see the link right above. You can get How to Be a Positive Leader. It's a fantastic book. It's going to give you a lot of insight from some of the foremost thinkers in the world of positive organizational scholarship, including our guest today, Gretchen Spreitzer. Gretchen, we've been so blessed by having you with us. We talk about that the dark cloud is not present, but the joy is here, and we appreciate the insight. So much for us to learn from you, and thank you for being a guest here on the Nonprofit Exchange. Really just thrilled with what you're doing. Folks, we're going to continue the conversation on Thursday night. We'll be having a #nonprofit chat Thursday night at 9. We'll be asking some deeper questions as follow-up to this so that we can continue to engage what it looks like to be a positive leader. Thanks for joining us on our episode today. Thank you to Gretchen again. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.